On the gray morning of November 6, 1661, bells rang out in Madrid. The news spread swiftly. King Philip IV had finally been blessed with a male heir by his second wife, Mariana of Austria. Expectations were high. After all, that baby represented the continuity of the powerful Habsburg dynasty, which for centuries had ruled vast swaths of Europe with iron fists and blood alliances. But when the court physicians extracted him from the maternal womb after a prolonged and complication-filled pregnancy, what they saw was a shock. Little Carlos came into the world with a fragile body, thin as a dry twig, his skin excessively pale, and features that were not just unusual, they were disturbing. His lower jaw was so protruding and misaligned that it made even basic functions like sucking from his mother hard. His eyes, half-closed and restless, gave him a vague, absent look. His skull seemed too large for his neck, and his movements barely existed. Spain, at that moment, was not merely gaining an heir. It was gaining an omen. Actually, if this story has you captive so far, click the 3 dots below here and activate the hype. That's a new YouTube function that helps the video reach more people and shows that this kind of content deserves to go further. Within a few months, the truth the court tried to hide began to echo beyond the walls of the Alcazar of Madrid. Foreign diplomats, seeing the boy, reported in astonishment what appeared to be signs of witchcraft. And that's when the nickname that would haunt him until death emerged, the Enchanted. And the tragedy born with him was not merely genetic. The empire he would inherit also carried its own deformities, but on a much larger scale. But the question troubling the continent was disturbing. How could an empire that had once been considered the most powerful on earth produce an heir like this? The truth is that this tragedy of the birth of Carlos II was merely the final chapter of a story that had begun much earlier. While the royal lineage was deteriorating behind palace doors, the Spanish Empire itself, outside them, had been decaying for generations. Under the command of Charles of Habsburg, the same who would be known as Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, the Spanish Empire reached colossal proportions. It ruled lands in Europe, America, Asia, and Africa. No other power of the time had such reach. To preserve its vast domains and its lineage, the House of Habsburg adopted an obsessive policy of keeping the blood pure. The reasoning was simple and, at first glance, brilliant. Marry among themselves, join crowns without shedding blood elsewhere. Cousins with cousins, uncles with nieces. And for a moment, this grandeur seemed eternal. But what seemed like a masterstroke of diplomatic strategy ended up being a genetic suicide. The physicians of the day did not yet understand the effects of inbreeding, but with each generation, the consequences became more visible. Royal family members with deformed skulls, degenerative illnesses, cognitive difficulties, and premature deaths. This silent deterioration wasn't only affecting the bodies of heirs, it was simultaneously eating away at the political foundation of the empire. And it was in this setting, still buoyed by past victories, that Philip II, son of Charles I of Habsburg, took the throne. He not only maintained power but expanded it. Devout, cold, and inflexible, he consolidated Catholic supremacy, confronted Protestants, and centralized administration with an iron grip. Philip II's Spain was feared, revered, respected. But when heirs Philip III and, later, Philip IV ascended to the throne, the greatness was already showing signs of exhaustion. The silver that once enriched the kingdom now caused runaway inflation. Administration had become slow, chaotic, and ineffective. Armies racked up defeats. The coffers, once overflowing, bled with ill-conceived wars and lavish spending. Spain, still immense on the map, was beginning to crumble quietly from within. In this context of crisis masked by festivities and protocol, the dynasty continued its policy of consanguineous alliances. Then came the decision that would seal the fate of its last heir. Philip IV married his own niece, Mariana of Austria, and the result of that marriage you already know, right? The boy who had been born as an omen, surrounded by care and silence, was now growing up before an empire in ruins. The following years would be a long dress rehearsal for a role he would never be truly able to play. And so, still surrounded by physicians, tutors, and palace intrigues, Carlos was led step by step toward the throne, not as a prepared ruler, but as a fragile piece on a board dominated by others. In 1675, Carlos turned 14. By law, that marked the beginning of his majority. He was officially the King of Spain, but in practice little changed. Carlos was in no condition to rule. His body remained frail, and his cognitive limitations were evident. He barely participated in decisions, and when he did, it was more as a spectator than as an authority. With no capable ruler on the throne, power became a target for internal factions. Nobles, advisors, clergy, all vied for control of state decisions in the king's name. The atmosphere at court was unstable. Rival factions fought among themselves while the country faced military defeats, economic crises, and the weakening of its imperial structure. The image of the king, fragile and sickly, only heightened the sense of uncertainty. Outside the court, religious rumors began to spread. Many saw Carlos's condition as divine punishment. They said he was the price paid for the monarchy's accumulated sins, for the wars, the corruption, and, above all, the marriages between blood relatives. Others whispered of curses, of witchcraft, and in silence, part of the population began to wonder how long he would survive. With a king unable to govern, Spain's only remaining hope was that Carlos would father an heir. That possibility, however remote, was seen as the last chance to keep the Habsburg dynasty alive on the Spanish throne. In 1679, at 18 years old, Carlos II married Marie-Louise d'Orleans, niece of Louis XIV of France. The marriage wasn't just a union between two crowns. It was a desperate political move to save the monarchy's future. But what came next was even more surprising. Year after year, there were no signs of pregnancy. The queen was young and healthy, and yet the couple had no children. At court, rumors began to spread. That Marie-Louise was barren, that she too had been cursed, that something supernatural was preventing the birth of an heir. Others, in hushed voices, stated the obvious. The problem lay with Carlos. The queen mysteriously died in 1689, at the age of 26. Officially, the cause was a sudden illness. A year later, Carlos remarried, this time to Maria Anna of Neuburg from the German nobility. But the result was the same. Nothing. No child. No succession. The only chance for the dynasty disappeared that night. Over time, doctors began to admit what many had already suspected. Carlos was almost certainly infertile. With hopes of an heir dashed by two childless marriages and Carlos's body growing ever weaker, there was no longer any doubt. The end of the Habsburg dynasty in Spain was only a matter of time. Carlos's health, fragile since birth, began to deteriorate irreversibly. He suffered seizures, fainted often, and in his final months, could no longer feed himself. He had lost teeth, muscle mass, and nearly all mobility. He slept little, spoke with difficulty. At many moments, he seemed disconnected from reality. Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, the European powers were already making their moves. France, Austria, and England, among others, knew that the Spanish throne would soon be vacant. Secretly, they began negotiating how the empire would be divided. Who would take the Italian territories? Who would control the American colonies? Who would inherit the crown? Spain stood on the brink of losing not just its king, but its sovereignty. In 1700, under pressure from internal factions and foreign interests, Carlos signed his final will. In it, he named Philip of Anjou, grandson of King Louis XIV of France, as his successor. The decision displeased Austria, England, and other powers that feared France would now dominate Spain as well. That was the spark. Soon after Carlos's death, on November 1st, 1700, the War of the Spanish Succession broke out. A conflict that involved almost all of Europe, redrew borders, destroyed cities, and forged new alliances. The empire that had once been the most powerful in the world was now being fought over like the spoils of war. The Habsburg dynasty, after centuries on the Spanish throne, had officially come to an end. The crown passed to the Bourbons. Austria received parts of Italy and the Low Countries. England emerged stronger and expanded its naval dominance. Spain, in turn, lost much of its influence and became a second-tier power. But the true impact of Carlos II's life would only be fully understood centuries later. Genetic studies conducted on documents and family trees revealed what the portraits and doctors of the time had only hinted at. Carlos was an extreme case of inbreeding. His coefficient of consanguinity was higher than expected even among the Habsburgs, genetically equivalent to being the child of siblings. He was the final product of generations of marriages between close relatives, made in the name of preserving power, but which ultimately undermined the biological foundation of the dynasty. Carlos II died without leaving children, without leaving a political legacy, without leaving any great achievements. But he left behind an unintended legacy. He became a historical example of the consequences of alliances that ignore the limits of the human body in the name of power preservation. Now I want to hear from you. If you had been in his place, would you have done things differently? Or was his fate sealed before he was even born? Leave your opinion in the comments below. If this story made you see the crown in a different light, drop a like. And if you want to keep uncovering the dark secrets of royalty, subscribe to the channel. If you thought this story was bizarre, just wait until you hear about the child Queen of England who married a 29-year-old king at age 6. Just click right here on the screen.